morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you happen to find yourself in the world at the moment, and welcome to our second QS in Conversation live panel. I am Anton John Crace, and I'm the editor and program designer at QS Quacquarelli Symonds. Now, on our second session, we're going to be looking at building upon reputation to form partnerships. And I have to apologize, I do live right near beside a road, so you can hear a bit of traffic and a little bit of noise going past. But before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsor today, that's Chiang Mai University. So I'll introduce our panelists. They are Andy Free, Head of Partner Markets in Impero Software, and Gabriel, Senior Vice President for Global Strategic Networks, Elsevier, David Reggio, Global Head of Consulting for QS Quacquarelli Symonds. Welcome everybody to the panel. Now, let's get started with the very first question. Actually, no, before we do, I would like to say to everybody, you, the audience, is as much a part of this as we are. So we have a Q&A section. If there's any questions you'd like asked, please do fill it out. And also we'll have some polls for you a little bit later. The first question I have, however, is how important is reputation when trying to build a partnership? Andy, I'll throw it over to you first.
Thanks, Anton. It's a really interesting question. You know, institutional reputation, indeed, that of sort of any private sector solution provider, like the organisations I work. Of course, it's massively important. But without being sort of too glib, it's also important for me to define exactly what reputation means in this context, and that requires a fairly deep level of understanding, within that partnership environment. So, looking at from just a business perspective, the importance of institutional reputation, are they someone who, with whom we'd like to work and be associated with because of their prestige? That really needs to be balanced by context and relevance. Are they someone that we can work with, and more importantly, are they someone that we're actually aligned to? Now, in addition, and it often depends on what reputation is based on. It's very easy to focus, especially from a business perspective, again, on those glossy elements of reputation. Take the UK university sort of ranking system. It would really be simple from a business perspective to say, oh wow, that's great. There's all these fantastic places, and as a business, we really want to do business with them, because that's going to reflect on us in a very, very positive way. But the reality is, our solutions and services may actually be better served, and indeed, probably thrive better in institutions within the lower tier. So it's really about getting that level of understanding. So yes, reputation, it's important, but for me, what is more important, again, from a partner development perspective, is undertaking that initial due diligence, understanding exactly what that potential partnership means, how it aligns, and then factoring the reputation in on that basis.
I think that's a really good point to start this discussion on. I've just had, I've been told that I got the sponsor wrong. It's actually the Faculty of Nursing, not the Faculty of Medicine. But I'll throw over to you, Anne. How important is reputation when trying to build a partnership?
I think it's one very important element. And I was talking about the fact that I was going to be on this panel with a colleague, and they shared a quote actually from Abraham Lincoln. I was surprised, but I thought I would share it here because it seems like it's fitting for the discussion. And it is that character is like a tree and reputation is its shadow. And the shadow is what we think of it, and the tree is the real thing. And I liked it not only because Elsevier's symbol is the tree of knowledge, if you will, but I think it's really important to think about what's at the core of any partnership and how both parties conduct themselves and what we're looking for in a partner. And a lot of that has to do with trustworthiness, not necessarily rankings, but the quality of the people behind the partnership. If you think about it, there's like a global techlash happening right now with countless examples of failing trust in the tech industry. And case in point, just yesterday, the CEOs of Amazon and Apple and Facebook were testifying before US Congress to defend their businesses against a list of allegations spanning from antitrust to misinformation on data privacy issues. So it's stories like that, to me, that reveal how important the role of the university is. And universities now serve as a cultural counterbalance to some of these tech companies. They're seen as trustworthy. And I think it's ripe for scrutiny how we look at our partnerships in terms of trust, not only ranking, not only standing or assume what we assume about them.
Absolutely. And I think a few years ago, Alexander Betts from Oxford University made a similar point around the level of trust that the public has in universities. It's always been quite high, but it's always been important to use that trust for social good. How about you, David? What is the importance of reputation when attempting to build a partnership?
Okay, so I would agree with our guests. Reputation is an important dimension, of course, but it's not a proxy for building partnerships. I think we kind of have to think about that different forms of partnerships have different outcomes, and that reputation is cultivated depending on how you manage and how you strategically set up your partnerships. I think if we say, well, yes, reputation does matter, but it's not the first priority, then we can become more inclusive. And I think it's very, very important to have a more inclusive approach to building partnerships sooner than an exclusive approach, because partnerships are about opportunity, scientific opportunity, and also participation. And I think it's very, very, very important to always consider that aspect of participation. Because if we've seen over the past 10 years, it's become very, very important, particularly for universities in the Western world, with dominant scientific traditions, to move from the role of a patrician to a role of a participant. And I think that's very, very important, especially when we're looking at Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, for example, and also areas of Latin America in terms of partnership building.
Absolutely. And on that note, we'll go to our first question, poll question for the audience to find out what they think. The question is, reputation is the most important factor for my institution when looking to create new partnerships. In the meantime, I'll flip my first question over and ask, how important are partnerships to building reputation? Let's go. I'll start with you, David, because I know that you've done a lot of work in the consulting area for QS. For you, what is the power of partnerships in building reputation for an institution?
I would say it's the most important driver for reputation of an institution, because you're talking about geographies and you're talking about communication. Let's introduce something. One of the biggest challenges for universities is narration. Okay, how they narrate their research narratives, how they narrate their student outcomes. And in the same way, when you're talking about partnerships, it's about how you're communicating your scientific value and the outcomes of these partnerships. Frameworks are very important. The way you manage partnerships are very important. But we need to understand that there's different forms of partnerships. The traditional form is basically based, let's call it the third tier, the lesser priority these days. It is kind of based on student exchange agreements, student mobility agreements. The second tier you can consider to be research agreements, which are limited by funding and restricted to the life cycle of research. And I'd say there's a more important tier, which is the strategic partnerships. And when you're talking about strategic partnerships, then you're talking about the effects it can have on reputation, because we're talking about scientific and cultural alliances in that respect. And when you're a strategic partner, you're a flagship partner. It's where, as I said before, you're contributing more, you're contributing to different processes, be it in that institution or that institution's nation, and you're contributing to different development processes as well, not just curriculum, but also social processes.
Absolutely. And now the results also have come in from our first poll, which is that 73% say yes, reputation is the most important factor for many institutions when looking to create new partnerships. I can see you nodding along, and I don't think you're particularly surprised by that result, and I don't think many of us are either. But I'll go to you. Anne, on the power of partnerships in building reputation. And I know following on from David's comments, I know before we met up, you're also talking about the many different types of partnerships that occur within higher education. And it's not just institution to institution, but also institution to private sector. Can you speak a bit to those points? Oh, sorry, Anne, you're actually still on mute.
I mute myself, or did you mute me? Anyway, we've already discussed, how a stronger reputation can lead to greater attractiveness as a potential partner. But the reverse is true, right? And where stronger partnerships can lead to a virtuous cycle of building reputation and attracting even more partners as a result. And so Elsevier has a lot of experience in that public-private partnership. And I can offer a specific example. A few years ago, we started partnering with Amsterdam Data Science, which connects academic and industrial partners to establish a strong data science and AI ecosystem in the Amsterdam region. And as a part of this partnership, we run a yearly data science master's program for tech talent, offering top students opportunities to write a thesis with Elsevier. And this program has directly enhanced both parties' reputations. The student project outcomes have often been co-published in leading AI and data science conferences. And importantly, Elsevier has reduced the recruiting time for data scientists, which we desperately need, from over 90 days to almost 0, with a backlog of externally recommended applications also from competing companies in the region. So you can see how there's this symbiotic relationship that crops up. And there's also a lot of empirical evidence we find demonstrating how partnerships can boost reputations. There's a Harvard Business Review study that shows partnerships, particularly those that cross some kind of border, whether it's geographical or sector specific, increase diversity, right? So you have partnerships increasing diversity, and that comes with a whole host of benefits, including the fact that teams with diverse leaders are 17% more likely to report that they are high performing, 20% more likely to make high quality decisions, 29% more likely to report behaving collaboratively. And it also has a positive impact on research impact. And some of our data from SciVal shows that for many universities, the farther research collaboration expands across institutional and national borders, the larger the research impact and visibility or field-weighted citation becomes. So if you look at the #1 institution on QS's 2021 World Rankings list, which admittedly is MIT, looking at the extent of collaboration for all of MIT's research papers, the field-weighted citation figures show that where there was no collaboration, right, 6% of papers had no collaboration, the field-weighted citation was just 1.3%. Where you had institutional collaboration within MIT, the field-weighted citation goes to 2%. And with only national collaboration, it's 2.6, but with international collaboration, which involved 51% of the papers, the field-weighted citation was 2.7%. So you can see through establishing with those partnerships, there's a direct impact that reflects positively on the institution and its output when they reach out to others for all those reasons. And sorry for the long answer, but I had a lot to say on this one.
We always appreciate long answers. And I think those stats in particular, they do show some very impressive and really the power of partnerships is something that QS has been talking about a lot. Partnering up is having a substantial impact on the reputation and really the influence, I suppose, of an institution. Andy, I'll throw the same question over to you. What is the power of partnerships on reputation?
Thanks, Anton. And again, great answers from Anne and David on this. And so I'll just add it and keep it sort of very, very simple from a solution provider sort of perspective. It's a great question. I think, as I indicated, understanding how the solution aligns to the partner requirements, both in the now and in the future, is absolutely vital in this. And to be honest, without that alignment and common objectives, then then they're just another customer. And perhaps slightly more concern to me is that then I'm just another vendor. And that's not really the space that we want to be in terms of, long-term partnerships. So, if we can get that deep understanding of not just our partners' sort of current requirements, but their journey, their longer term objectives and thinking, then you can get this really sort of fantastic dynamic and transfer of thinking. And it's precisely this type of environment which leads to things like best practice, better outcomes. And of course, from there, you have enhanced reputations for not just for the institution, but for both parties. And, again, that's just really, really important to us. It doesn't happen overnight, though. It requires patience so that, you can develop real insights into their requirements, and their journey. Sometimes, a lot of the time, it's going to need investment. You have to be prepared to put that investment in, both in monetary terms, in terms of time. But of course, the upside of this is that from a commercial point of view, it's enhancing the partner's reputation. That reflects well on you. And, for argument's sake, and I suppose an example is, better management of remote learning. That's been very, very topical just recently. And if you can deliver that and work with your partners on these solutions, then of course, again, from a commercial perspective, it provides a great deal of stickiness in the relationship.
I think these are all great answers, and so far I think we've got some very great quotes out of this the seminar already, which is otherwise they're just another customer, and also reputation is the shadow. Now the next question I had was, what are the best ways to showcase reputation and quality to potential partners? And I think you already touched on it a little bit, Anne, so I'll throw that question over to you first.
Right. Well, reputation is important, and we are living in a world where decisions, including those about partnership, are increasingly based on data and analytics, right? So you're moving from what was anecdotal knowledge of who might be a good partner or who had maybe a small existing collaboration at one institution, and they use a lot of personal networks. But these decisions in selecting a partner and even in showcasing oneself to be selected by a partner can be bolstered by using data and tools. And we see companies have moved from ad hoc collaboration to a much more evidence-based and cost-benefit analysis to an approach when selecting an academic partner. And it can be based on reputation and rankings as a sole factor, but they also look at other things. For example, commitment to grand scale societal challenges, or in some cases, just perfect fit. And this is a big area of focus for Elsevier. And as a lot of you know, we provide these analytical tools and services for institutions and companies and governments. And in many cases, it helps them showcase their strengths. For example, in New Jersey, which is my home state where I live, we developed a statewide portal, which includes Princeton and Montclair State and Rowan University and Rutgers, of course. And the idea was to better showcase the geographic synergies of New Jersey as a regional partner to, in many cases, big pharma or others. I think they saw that they were slipping and losing share in the region. But to do that, they had to have a platform to showcase the data. They had to show where the research was being conducted. So, for example, looking at detailed, granular reports on where people might find a specific researcher who could inform their own projects. We have other very personal examples. We have a connection, Dr. Vishal Rao, who's a prominent cancer and immunology researcher in India, who's partnering with us to advise the Indian government on quarantine protocols and treatment options for COVID-19. And so, the world is still not an entirely interconnected place, although it's increasingly global. And Dr. Rao needed to find a partner to fast track his clinical proposals and bring awareness of the implications of immunology research on COVID treatments. And so he used our tool, Pure, to create profiles, to look at the profiles of the researchers, and he identified a partner at Emory University in Atlanta, and today they're actually collaborating on a phase 1 trial for an immunological COVID-19 treatment. So I think by having access to the tools to showcase oneself, you're more likely to be selected. It's a way of putting your head above the parapet, and it's a way in which to be evaluated on all kinds of metrics, not just your ranking, but what are the areas of expertise? What are the geographical emphases that we see? So there's a lot of, I think, good ways we can work with others to showcase their strengths.
That's a really good point on the regional location as well. I know that at the moment, Pacific Island countries are increasing the number of collaborations they're having with universities outside who are looking at climate action and climate change using the Pacific Islands. Unfortunately, the terminology is canary in the mine shaft, which is not necessarily the best in this case. As one academic pointed out, the canary is expected to die. But the regional is important. I'll throw over to you, David, the same question, which is, what are the best ways to showcase reputation and quality to potential partners?
Okay, so I'll approach it from a complementary university perspective. And I'll go back to what I mentioned before, which is about narration, your narratives. And there's actually a quote I kind of always use and drop in when I'm talking to universities, is that communication is the game, not part of it. And I think that's very, very important when we're talking about reputation. So let's a very simple approach. What the university is doing to communicate the value, their kind of research assets, their academic assets, and their leadership assets. How are they communicating those? And what I find and my team find in working with universities all over the world is that some very, very simple approaches are not employed to create these narratives. And and that's where they're missing out on giving visibility to these scientific assets they have, which is the market proposition of the university. So let's think of something like LinkedIn. It's so simple. And we're so used to seeing institutions use LinkedIn very, very well in the UK, in the USA, and in Australia. However, if we go to other parts of the world, they're not using LinkedIn effectively. And LinkedIn is kind of it's no cost, is it? It's no cost and potentially high impact. So that's a mechanism they should be using to actually begin to glean visibility of their assets. The other thing, Twitter. At EDS, we provided a small study to show how universities were using Twitter. And not many were using it to talk about their research. So these are two very simple examples, two very simple instruments that should be employed effectively. I can say that UK universities use LinkedIn and Twitter in a very, very good way. But other nations are yet to use them effectively. This goes back to the question of, well, what are the practices? What do we need to do? There's loads of examples I can share with you where we go to an institution and there's a great seminar happening at the institution on a very cutting edge area of science, and it's in-house. They haven't shared it with their partners, and we'll say, well, have you shared it with your international partners? Are you streaming this? Are you sharing it with your partner networks? No. And there's other areas of the university that aren't even aware of the seminar taking place. So when we're talking about building reputation, yes, we have to talk about narratives, but also the visibility we're giving to our initiatives, the visibility we're giving to our what I call research assets. We have to think about the practices. Data is extremely important, but also the practices behind the data that ensure that we can cultivate that reputation.
Absolutely. And finally, I'll go over to you, Andy. What are the best ways to showcase reputation to a potential partner?
Thanks. And really just adding a little bit more then, to what Anne and David have been saying, and which I agree with. For me, it really does come down to those tangibles, a track record for providing, increases in productivity or outcomes. There has to be, when you're showcasing that reputation or that quality, it has to be based on those tangibles. In other words, it's about facts, data, and analysis of that data, as opposed to sort of lies, damn lies, and statistics, if you like. Looking to the before and after, and whether it has had those proven tangible benefits or enhancements, don't be afraid, to share your previous experiences. That's going to be important to a partner, and not just the good stuff. Don't be afraid to share in those areas where where during the journey it hasn't worked so well. Again, it's about that knowledge transfer. And Anne touched on this earlier on. If you have that level of openness and integrity, it not only helps create clarity in thinking, but it also engenders a level of trust, which is a vital component in both a partnership and in enhancing those partnership reputations.
I'm very glad you brought up that last point, actually, Andy. One of the most recent QS in Conversation podcasts, which is also available, was talking about building partnerships, and it was discussing in particular the need to have as much trust as possible. Now, we're going to go over to our second poll question, which is: an institution with less reputation needs to work harder to prove the benefits of a partnership. And again, I remind all of our attendees that if you would like to ask a question of either Andy, David, or Anne, feel free to do so in the Q&A section. And while we wait for that poll to come up and get our responses, let's go to the next one, which sort of hits on what we're talking about anyway, which is: should different approaches be taken depending on the type of partner? Does the private sector look for other areas of strength rather than an institution? And I'll go back to you straight away, Andy. What are the different approaches per sought after partner?
Yeah, it's, again, I'd go back to what I was saying earlier on about partners undertaking that necessary due diligence. Look past, if you like, that reputational facade in some respects. Both the good and the bad, and focus on how your respective services and solutions are aligned, and how together you can create reputation, building solutions, or enhancing improvements and outcomes. While there are significant similarities in thinking, sort of structures, goals, and objectives, my personal experience is that every institution, whether that's state-run, it's private, it's domestic, or international, they're all going to be different. From a commercial perspective, it makes my life an absolute nightmare sometimes, because you've got to get your head around all of these different ways that people are delivering, education to learners. So, absolutely, it's not just a question of whether different approaches will be taken, but an almost absolute certainty that they will. And it's down to us to find where we can add value in those potential partnerships to what is often a unique set of circumstances. My background's in educational technology, so a classic example would be understanding what solutions are being deployed in a specific institution. And again, that's not so much from looking at it from a competitive product point of view, like whose product's in there, can I do something better, but all the other solutions that go to make up that particular institution's sort of learning ecosystem, if you like. And there's solutions that I currently work with, for instance, classroom management and student well-being. It's often deployed alongside learning management systems or content providers. And we have close relationships and partnerships with many of those solutions, especially those with good reputations, of course. So it's not so much a case of whether we're looking at other areas of strength specifically within an institution, but more of a case of where we can leverage other types of partner relationships to add strength to an institutional partner.
And again, I see you nodding your head along with that, Anne. Would you like to add on to Andy's comments?
Yeah, I think so. From a public-private perspective, I think that we are looking for different qualities and different partners, and the private sector looks for, I think, different areas of strength than they may have a few years ago. And businesses operate in a climate of close public scrutiny, and enabled in large part by social media, going back to what David said about communication of success and how we, steer our narratives. And we also see that the public has a lot of influence on business behavior and transparency, perhaps more so than at other points in history. So we look at partners from a standpoint not only of, I don't know, product development synergies or academic achievement, but also from the standpoint of corporate social responsibility and other areas. So we might look at a partner in terms of their ability to complement our own efforts in the areas of sustainable development or inclusion and diversity. And SDGs have come up earlier in our conversations, of course, and I also touched on the fact that SDGs are of primary importance to the success of our globe. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are an increasingly valuable framework for advancing research on social, economic, and environmental progress. So we might look at a potential partner for ways in which they can help our own efforts, or we can actually help theirs. Even in the US, which has been really slow to adopt this framework, and I'm sorry to say that's the case, there's a rapidly growing chapter of UN Sustainable Development Solutions Networks, for example, led by Columbia, Yale, UC San Diego. We were part of the NSF Big Data Hubs partnership, which also championed on the West Coast a lot of sustainable development initiatives. And so we'll also look at partners from the standpoint of inclusion and diversity strengths. And we are increasingly having these really open and transparent dialogues about what exactly it means to move the needle on diversity and inclusion. And I want to say that a lot of this discussion has been about partner selection and what we might look for in a partner, but I'm also very conscious about what others might look for in us as a partner. So when we come to things like diversity and inclusion, we have to look at our own house first. So in the US, for example, I think the STM publishing industry as a sector doesn't do very well in terms of inclusion and diversity. It's not a very diverse population. I think that 14% of Americans are of Black, and in the publishing industry, those figures are only 8%. So we have to do better. In order for us to be an attractive partner to others, we have to earn it, and we have to walk the walk. And similarly, we're looking for those qualities in others, and together maybe we can make a difference. I'll also just touch on one other area, and that is of gender equality, where we've made some real strides using AI and machine learning to mine the corpus of the world's scientific journal content, more than 100 million records, and we were able to disambiguate male versus female authors, right? So then you could see where women are able to publish, in which fields, how much, and what you measure you can change. And so it wasn't enough for us just to measure it. We started implementing best practice guidelines in our journals and in our conferences to say, if a field like engineering is 30% women, then our editorial boards have to reflect that and more. Our conferences have to reflect that and more. No more males. So we're trying to become the partner that people want to partner with because we're living that ethos, right? And that's what we look for in others. And it's not just about a ranking always.
Absolutely not. It's not always about the ranking at all, and looking at other areas that are of equal importance. I do like that point that effectively be the partner that you're looking for in others. Now, the results for the poll have come back, and they're not that surprising. An institution with less reputation needs to work harder to prove the benefits of a partnership. The answer was overwhelmingly yes. No one said no. But for you, David, I will finalize this point by asking the same question: is what are the different approaches that should be taken depending on the type of partner that is being looked for?
Okay, so I think there's two words that have come up here. Dialogue is extremely important, and participation. And, you know, it depends on, okay, there's certain factors here. It depends on the type of science you do, and it depends on the particular region you're operating in. Okay, so let's say, for example, new scientific horizons. And new scientific economies that are emerging at the moment. So one of those is AI and deep learning, what they call convolutional neural networks. let's take that as an example. That requires superior processing power, okay, to a very extreme extent, and to the point of where only a few nations have that in-house computing power. We're talking at the moment, I just think it's UK, USA, and China that have supercomputers to this superior level. Now, that's not to say the talent to develop convolutional neural networks only exists in these nations that have these computers, does it? So again, we're coming back to the idea of funding facilities and ideas. And I think, well, if we have the tech as a value proposition, then we can easily partner around the world and, you know, partner with talent in nations that don't have that tech available to them yet. The other thing is, in terms of dialogue and participation, I'd say, well, there's a lot of great work happening in SDGs, and there has been for a very, very, very long time. And we're not just talking about science here. The field of education, for example, special educational needs, what they call SEND, it's been happening for around 20 years. Let's take the UK. People who train teachers in the UK in special and educational needs have been going to places like Latin America and Africa and helping them develop their educational systems and their educational policies for a long time. However, what's happening in the field of education hasn't necessarily had the visibility it deserves. So there's great outcomes there. And again, it's how we're participating and the particular frameworks we put into place for these partnerships. Excuse me. And that's why it's so very important to manage our partnerships effectively and to build strategic partnerships, yes, in key scientific areas, but also when we're talking about SDGs, we're going to factor in ways of communicating the outcomes. Education is not necessarily going to have citable outcomes or citable documents, but it definitely has a social impact. So I think, as I said before, different partnerships, different forms of partnerships have different outcomes. Some require very, very advanced frameworks. Some require models that enable more visibility. And also, if we talk about industry, let's talk about industrial partners. What I hear from industry quite a lot of the time is that they want to participate more with the university. They just don't want to do research, but they want to contribute to curriculum development. They want to do, they want to move beyond the state of just being a provider for internships. So again, in terms of bridging skills gap with industry, there's more work to be done there.
I think that hits on. I'm loath to say that there are many failings within education, because I don't think they're failings. It's certainly there are areas that need to be improved. The partnerships with industry is one that also comes up in employability. Employers want to connect with universities, universities want to connect with employers, and yet in my time within the international education industry, which is about 10 years now, we're still having pretty much the same conversations we had when I first started. In that case, are there other approaches? I'll go to you, Anne. Are there other approaches that should be taken when trying to understand what a partnership is? It's not simply an MOA or an MOU between two or more entities, but is it something else?
I think it's looking at intended outcomes. I also think that it's important as a university or other organization builds its reputation. There needs to be some demonstration of flexibility in looking at the partnerships and recognizing that not maybe everybody comes to the table with the same assets, and there has to be a lot of mutual respect for the needs in the partnerships. One of the challenges that we face actually is when we partner with an institution, we've had these requests where now we're partners. You signed the MOU, please give us all your data. And we're, obviously the partnership has to work on every level. Like, everyone has to be able to sustain it. Each organization has to be able to sustain itself within the framework of the partnership. So there's an aspect of mutual respect beyond the MOU and an understanding of what each party can sustainably bring to the table that I think has to be taken into consideration. And I think the flexibility is also an important point. Anecdotally, we've heard of instances where we had a corporation partner with a high-ranking university on a series of research projects. And in the end, the reputation of the university got better and better. And as a result of the reputation getting better and better, they instituted a lot of bureaucratic roadblocks, and in some cases were even asking for money up front before an introduction of a professor. And eventually the partnership dissolved in kind of a sea of bureaucracy and money, and it became more about the partnership than the outcomes that was desired. So navigating these things with sensitivity is really important, and being attuned to your partner's needs, which applies in every aspect of life, not just academic industry collaboration.
That's very, very true. For you, Andy, is there a need for a different type of understanding about what is a partnership and flexibility, as Anne has pointed out?
Yeah, things do change over time. It's undoubtedly true. We sometimes joke about crusty academics in dusty gowns, but almost regardless again of reputation, higher education is under sort of massive pressure worldwide. Take the UK. That there's pressure on student recruitment in the UK now. The flip side is completely different in Africa, where there's pressure on increasing the number of places available throughout and that's throughout the emerging markets. Private institutions are sort of identifying niche markets, segments, and challenging the traditional seats of learning. And coming back to what you were just saying, Anton, about the disconnect between industry and institutes of higher learning. And again, I'm thinking sort of specifically from my experiences in Africa and Southeast Asia, it's enormous. So, there is now, huge pressure on TVET, for instance, and significant investment is going in at a government level as they seek to sort of close that gap and create more employment opportunities. Now, it's created a really sort of dynamic sort of environment, and at times, a lot of innovation is going with this. And again, it's personal observation, opinion. It's precisely these types of institutions, that are responding positively to these new requirements, that are beginning to change and that beginning to enjoy those enhancements in reputation, as opposed to a completely different reputation. Again, looking at it from simply from a service provider point of view, what's important to an existing partnership. Again, it's about understanding that. It's about working together to keep pace with those demands. And it's not just internalized, it's externalized as well. It's about the environment and what the demands of those market forces are. And so, it's of paramount importance that you remain flexible, not just with the partner, but within our own development paths as well. So it's not just about what does the partner want, but taking a far more sort of holistic view of what the environment wants. And, this is equally true in finding new partnerships, especially those with a growing reputation, and understanding their future pathways as well.
Absolutely. And also prior to this, we were talking a lot about Africa and the types of partnerships are in there. So I'd like to come back to that a little bit. But David, do you have anything to add on about the understanding of what a partnership is and whether that needs to change a little bit?
Yeah, I think, again, from a university perspective, when you ask the university if they've got partnerships, some universities will say, yeah, we've got 200 partnerships. And you'll kind of say, really, 200 partnerships? And then you'll say, well, which ones are active and who are your most important partners? And then they'll come back with a list of 3. So I think what I think what that shows is that universities have to again categorize their partnerships. Are we talking about just student mobility? Are we talking about purely research partners, which are limited by funding, and as I said before, restricted to the life cycles of a project, and generally don't go beyond that? Or are we talking about flagship partners where things are more embedded, where actions are more integrated? And I think in the first, when we're talking about strategic partnerships, or, to use a diplomatic term, alliances, then universities have to be willing to be agile. And I've seen some great possibilities fall flat, great possibilities of strategic partnerships fall flat when the institution has expected the partnership to be brokered through funding alone, for a particular funded project. And, at the end of the day, they've zipped up their bags and walked off in separate directions from the table, where they could have developed a host of different initiatives around the science they were seeking funding for. So what I'm saying is you have to be agile, and you have to be very, very strategic in the way you're mapping possibilities for this partnership to go forward. Maybe you don't receive the funding, but maybe there's other initiatives you can do together. Maybe there's mutual showcasing events you can do. Maybe it's something as simple as a webinar series online. But definitely institutions have to be agile in terms of developing what we call alliances or strategic partnerships, which are the most important partnerships of today and which are extremely important for building reputation.
That is also a really good point. We also bring up a lot about meaningful partnerships. And it makes me think back to a previous role I had, which was working in graduate employability. And I'd speak to some students and they'd say, yes, I went off to a recruitment fair and I got 100 business cards. And that's very good, well done. What did you talk to them about? And the answer was always, I don't know, I didn't really talk to them, I just have a business card. So simply having the bulk of business cards or partnerships doesn't necessarily result in building reputation or anything of substance. We'll go to our final poll question, which is, over time, it becomes easier to create partnerships. And I think that this one will be a little bit interesting in its results because equally it could actually become much more difficult. Going back to Africa, one of the points that we were discussing outside of this conversation was that there is a risk, especially during COVID-19, when we're having to rely a lot on the technology that's available in our regions and our areas, that there is a widening gap between the haves and the have-nots. Andy, do you have any comments on those sorts of concerns?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. We've seen a lot of investment going into higher education throughout Africa. But without necessarily taking it to its logical extent. And it's often very difficult getting sort of political alignment with institutional alignment as well. Part of that is a funding issue. As I've said on that last sort of comment, we're seeing a lot of investment now go into TVET. A classic example will be, let's take Kenya, for instance. They currently have around about 300,000 TVET students. They have ambitions to take that to 1.2 million within the next 2 to 3 years. That is going to require not just funding, but a huge investment in time and effort from a diverse range of partners to actually make that achievable and to make it a quality product that is fit for purpose at the end.
Yes, and we just got the results in which, again, not overly surprising. 75% said yes, it does become easy to form partnerships over time, but there is a 25% that says no, it becomes more difficult. And I guess that would reflect that quite often you're only as good as the last thing you did, so you continue to have to continue working over and over and over. For you, Anne, are there any concerns around, not necessarily just Africa, but other areas, regions, or even institutions that during this period of time we are widening the gap rather than bringing it closer together?
I think it's always a challenge to be everywhere at once, right? And obviously in a post-pandemic society, these gaps are becoming even more acute and more urgent. But I do want to point out that there are areas where we've had some success, and the benefits of being a reliable partner accrue over time. So, you know, in Africa in particular, we developed a journal called Scientific African, which is owned by the Next Einstein Forum and operated by the NEF community of scientists. And this is a peer-reviewed, open access, interdisciplinary scientific journal that is dedicated to expanding access to African research. But we never would have been able to partner with NEF in this way if we hadn't already had a strong track record of being there on the ground with other partnerships, such as our Publishers Without Borders program, or the collaboration with the World Academy of Sciences, which aims to boost the 2% of sustainability research currently contributed in low-income countries by engaging scientists in solutions. So it's important to remain present, it's important to be open, and it's important to elevate the work of others, and nothing could be more critical than doing that in a post-pandemic society.
Absolutely, and I'll ask the same question of you, David.
Yeah, I think, again, it depends on the geographical regions we're building partnerships in. There's some countries that remain complex enigmas to let's say, I'll use the example of UK institutions. Let's take in Latin America, Brazil, for example. I don't believe that partnerships have been as strong as they could have been with Brazil. And that there's several factors involved with that. One of those factors is that Science Without Borders wasn't as successful as it was imagined to be. The second may be because of the cultural agility that's required to engage with such a country as vast as Brazil, and the different realities between the states and the different scientific demands and the different social expectations that universities in Brazil have to meet. So definitely with a country like Brazil, it takes time, and it takes agility, it takes understanding, and it takes dialogue and participation as well. A university in Brazil is not just expecting a research agreement, because universities in Brazil operate in different directions. They have participation in more in social processes, in local education processes with the local schools. They do a lot of outreach. They don't just do the scientific work, they do a lot of outreach with the local community. So that's what would be expected of a partner to contribute to as well. As I said before, participating in those development processes. And I don't think it would be any different with Africa. Definitely the institutions I've spoken to in Africa don't expect any different. They want a partner to, over time, become part of development, of the institutional development, and also of the social development and the national development. And that's kind of expected and warranted as well. Now, saying that, in terms of science, there has been a lot of science undertaken with Africa and contributing to enhancing the research environments in Africa. If we think of what the Wellcome Trust has done over the past 10 to 15 years, there's very great timely initiatives. If I remember, the Alliance for Accelerating Excellent Insights in Africa, ASEA, as the Wellcome Trust called it, and the Sub-Saharan Africa project called Deltas, that the Wellcome Trust have been running for quite some time. These are good examples in terms of research and capacity building. So yes, it takes time, but very, very importantly, if we haven't got that agility And if we haven't got that preparedness to participate in processes that go beyond traditional research or traditional academic programs, then it's going to take even longer.
That is also very true. Now we are fast approaching the end, so I will throw over, are there any other remaining remarks anyone would like to make? And do you have any final remarks?
Well, I think this has been a really illuminating session, and I think that what has emerged for me is that the way of approaching partnerships is multifaceted, not only in terms of the metrics that one would use to evaluate a partner, but also in terms of the character of the partnership and what one seeks in another. And so whether it be academic to academic partnership or public-private partnership, in the end, I think we're all looking for that unique combination of success factors, both numeric and characterful, that are going to make it work. And therein lies the opportunity, right? And we can all steer into our strengths and become more successful. So that's what I took away from this session.
Redefining what success and also what a partnership means. Andy, I'll throw to you.
Thanks, Anton. And yeah, just echoing what Anne was saying there. It's been a really, really interesting session, and just getting, different perspective. I think from, my point of view, and in summary, as a service provider, as a partner, you can't be all things to all people. And it can be really refreshing, though, to work with institutions that have a clear vision of the direction and services that they want to provide. And as a service provider, it's then to work with them to actually deliver that. And with that, we started off talking about, reputation and enhancing reputation. And it's from that you get those sort of reputational gains. And without wishing to steal too much from David, he mentioned a couple of times about agility and about, that need to remain nimble. Absolutely, that is so beholding upon the partnership, to keep that agility, to understand the dynamics within the marketplace, and really to work together to deliver those improved outcomes.
Brilliant. And finally, David, any final remarks you'd like to make?
Well, to compliment our guests, I'd say it's great that we've moved from the idea of reputation as a basis of partnerships to the idea of collaboration, dialogue, and participation, and agility, because these are all very, very important aspects to building successful partnerships. And of course, partnerships, the way they're set up, will inform the particular outcomes of the partnerships, and those outcomes will inform the strength of the reputation. So this has been a great session, and I think it's really good that we've dissolved the idea of reputation into something far more strategic, far more cross-cultural.
Thank you very much for that, David. I also quite enjoyed it. I always enjoy going to conferences and getting to moderate sessions like I do here, and to start unpacking and drilling out. I hope the audience has also enjoyed it as much as we enjoyed talking about it. Again, thank you to our sponsor, Chiang Mai University Faculty of Nursing. Thank you very much to the audience for participating, and thank you very much to Andy Free and Gabriel and David Reggio for joining me today on our second live QS in Conversation Live. Now, if you enjoy talking about reputation and partnerships, and you enjoy listening to interviews like this, we do also have a podcast. So you can see those, and you can listen to those on Spotify and Apple, or go direct to our website, which is qsinconversation.com. Other than that, on behalf of the head of programs, Monica Khunung Katang, good night.